capable for those of you who are following along with him. And as for the fused mouse, that is also now handled. So if I go into soft selection over here and switch it to surface, you can now see that it is in fact a functioning MA. Alright, turn that off. So I'm going to just quickly kind of draw in a joint chain for his spine, following the flow of the mesh. I'm going to go to my animation shelf here, grab my joint tool. I'm going to reset it to make sure it's static, set to what it's set to. And from my side view here, since he is on the axis, I'm just going to draw in a spine. Okay. So imagine my roots right here. So there we go. I'm not going to draw an overabundance of joints here because he's not overly high poly here. So there we go. So you should have a setup like this, essentially right now, at least for the spine. Actually, let me quickly go in and name it too, just as far as good practice is concerned. This one should actually be neck. All right. Kind of clicking fast there. I don't like the joint setup here in the neck, so I'm going to insert a joint. And if you guys need to do that, you can go to skeleton here, insert joint tool, and you can drag one in. There we go. So then I'll just adjust my names. So now we neck 3. There we go. Okay, so far so good, right? Kind of looks like what you guys have. Let me turn off my polys for a second here. Here's the issue with what we've got so far. Now, I know you guys have been snapping to our templates, but it's going to work exactly the same. See this curve in the back, right? You see how it curves back on itself and back? Well, here's what that does when you have this kind of setup. Go to rotate in Z, and it's going to curl in on itself. You guys see that? And what we want is we want consistent behavior, so there's no surprises, and when we set values on our controllers, they correspond with the 0 point and with each other. So in order to accomplish that, we actually need to go in here and change these local rotation orders to something that works. So it's actually a lot easier than it seems right now. Essentially, when you select one of these joints and you hit E, it brings up the rotate tool. The rotate tool is corresponding with the local rotation axes of these joints, because ultimately that's all these joints are to begin with, is they are a series of nothings in space that hold a rotational axis that allows us to bend geometry in a way that gives the impression that it is actually a character. Okay? But if we actually wanted to go in here and change how this is set up, we don't necessarily have to have all our joints set up like we did. It's great that we did, because ultimately it means less headache for us. The spine is one of those situations that we're, generally speaking though, we're probably going to have to go in and fix it. So in order to access the local rotation axis, what you're going to do is you're going to actually switch to component mode. And you can do this in one of two ways. One way is you can click on this little grid-looking icon right up here. Okay, and that's going to immediately switch you to vertex, which is the default for what is selected. Okay, we don't need to access vertices on this, so I'm going to deselect it. The little question mark at the end here is where you're going to find local rotation axes. If you right-click on it, you'll see the other things that are accessed on this tab, right? So I'm going to turn on local rotation axes, and nothing happened. Well, that's because I don't have anything selected. If I select my joint chain here, you can actually see the behavior that's happening, right? So basically, everywhere this turns over, Y is trying to find its way up. It's kind of the path of least resistance. And this is ultimately why our spine is compressing in on itself when we rotate in positive Z. Because if Z is on the negative side over here and it's on the positive side over here, the same values will do the opposite, right? And if that is just too blah, blah, blah for you, suffice it to say, ultimately what we want when we look at a joint chain is consistency. We want all these guys to match in the same direction. Doesn't matter terribly if X is down the chain, Y is down the chain, or Z is down the chain. It doesn't terribly matter if Y is trying to find its way up or Z is pointing one direction. What actually matters is consistency, because we need behavior that we can depend upon so that we can actually actively modify it. So, with this selected, I can now actually select these guys, and I can actually move them. So if I do something like this, and I switch back into object mode, which is by clicking this guy up here, when I get to that joint that I just affected, look at my rotation axes now. They're all crazy like. Changing that local rotation axis actually changes how this thing bends. Now, Z is this way. So the great news about this is, let's say your joint chain, your entire skeleton that you have been building is exhibiting some kind of strange behavior when you go to rotate it. Something feels off. You can go in to these local rotation axes by going into component mode and switching it on over here and actually edit them individually. One example of that might be the thumb. If you got the hinge joints here working right, but this guy still doesn't feel just right, you can actually specifically go in on that joint and start tweaking it to get a behavior that you would want, right? Now obviously you would need to fix all of that before it's mirrored, right? The bright side of that is you guys all saw how easy mirroring joint chains was. It's easy breezy, right? No?
Could you repeat it?
How to mirror a joint chain?
I had an issue with trying to mirror it. It wouldn't do it. I don't know what error came up that.
Okay.
Or what
Yeah,
I did wrong.
I'll happily go through it. Absolutely. Okay. First though, let me just finish my little tirade on this. It's actually pretty darn easy. So, there's a few ways we can do this. One way is to steal a bit of mel code by simply moving this in the axis we want to flip, undoing, and grabbing it down here, pasting it over here, right? That is one way to do it. It's the more complicated way, right? So if I grab this x-axis and I rotate it slightly, then undo it, it's going to say undo colon rotate blah blah blah. You can choose to remember this if you're, 1337 about it, for those of you who are programmers. But ultimately, it's just as easy to undo it. Throw it over here. This first number here, that's x. Right? Generally speaking, when you see three numbers separated by a space or a comma, they're going to be x, y, z values. Well, we were just rotating an x, so it's really no surprise that the first series of numbers is x, right? But what we actually want is this guy flipping around. So it's a simple matter of grabbing this, keeping mind of the space, and typing in 180. You hit enter, bam, flipped around, right? That's one way we can do it. That's the little bit more complex way. The other way we can quickly flip these around is by turning on discrete rotate, which is in the rotate tool settings. So double click on your rotate tool, and you're going to get tool settings. They're usually docked over here. Mine only pops out like this because I don't like it docked, because I like to be able to choose where it goes in my interface, right? and it's going to be right here, right under rotate pivot. If you click this guy on, the step size are actually angles. So let's make it very easy. If you want it to flip around and you don't really want to guess about it, you could easily just type in 180 here. And now when I try and rotate this, it's going to ignore me until it gets to the flipping point, right? Now generally speaking, I like Y to be towards the back of the character. It's just a preference. It's not really, you don't have to have it that way. So I'm just going to flip Y to be all on this backside. Once all of the directions, once all of the local rotation axes are consistent, watch what happens when we go back into object mode and do what we did before. So I'm going to select all these joint chains. So I'm just going to go. You guys can control shift select them if you want. I just wanted to quickly grab them. And now when I rotate it in one direction, you see how it folds in on itself properly? Like it does like a kind of a spiral. Now the behavior is consistent. So, yay on that one. All right? Does that make sense to everybody? Is everybody confused on that part? Simple, right?
Yeah.
Nice. All right. Let's create a joint chain for the arm. And let's mirror it. So, grab my joint tool here. And I'm just going to draw out some joints for this. I'm going to set an arbitrary clavicle. Set it over here, thereabouts. Shoulder. I'm looking at my geometry. I'm still trying to keep in mind any kind of bends I want. Down to the wrist, center of the hand, enter. Okay? Now because I didn't have the guides that you guys had when I drew this, mine threw it on the grid, which is fine, because it is kind of a parented hierarchy on its own. I'm going to bring back my geometry. And that's interesting. Show all. I'm going to get this guy in the arm. So there we go. All right. So I'm going to tie this joint back into the spine by parenting. Let me just freeze transforms first before I do that. Transforms. I'm going to hit P. I'm going to quickly name my arm joints because that's just good form. So we're going to call this L. Clavicle. Oops. Or clavicil, if you can't spell. Okay. Call this L shoulder. L hand. Okay. So here's our joint chain, right? We want to mirror it to the other side. Okay. It's really quite simple. I have this joint chain that is the spine. It's on the center axis, actually riding right along the x-axis, if you look. See? And the mirror axes we need to keep in mind of are basically the plane that forms that split down the middle. So if you look down here, this is Z, right? Z going back, and Y is up. So it's going to be ZY that we want to mirror across, okay? You've got to keep that in mind. I like to think of the axis down here in the bottom left as though it was a plane or a saw, right? If I was to actually turn it into a quad, it would slice right down where I want to mirror across. So in this case, YZ. I'm going to select my left clavicle, go up here to skeleton, down to mirror joint, little option box. I have to tell it which axis, so in this case it's YZ. I want to keep behavior. It gives me the results I want. I'm going to say search for L underscore and replace it with R underscore since we took the time to name it. It's a simple matter of clicking mirror. Okay? If yours isn't giving you this behavior, or it's mirroring in some strange direction, it may have to do with the direction your model is facing.